Hi everyone, my name is Precious Wally. I'm a longtime member of the World Trigger Discord community. I started watching the World Trigger anime in, 2018. And after that, I started to reread the whole series and I'm fully caught up with the manga. Recently, there have been a lot of newer members in the server that are interested in creating World Trigger OCs, specifically around their own kind of hypothetical A rank and B rank agents, typically self inserts, right? And so, what I've been doing is I've been trying to help a lot of these newer members bring their ideas to life in a way that is accurate and respects the series, right? So, I wanted to create this video as a more formal guide to that. So, first of all, let's start with a definition. What are OCs? For those of you that don't know, OC is an abbreviation for the term original characters. This is not just a World Trigger thing. This exists for a bunch of different franchises and series, but it's the idea that you are a fan, and let's say you create a character that's not a part of the existing intellectual property, but you want to create something that is kind of a homage to that intellectual property and insertion into that universe, right? So that's the idea behind it. And in World Trigger, we coined the term WTOC, or World Trigger OCs, right? That is, you've created an OC that pertains to the World Trigger universe that Daisuke Ashihara created, right? And what is this World Trigger OC going to be in? Well, it's going to be in Ashihara's universe, right? The whole idea that, remember, World Trigger is about aliens called neighbors that are attacking Medan, right? Which is kind of the fictional version of Earth. And now Border is a private military organization that is recruiting teenagers to defend Medan, but they're providing these teenagers with very unique and highly advanced military technology called triggers. Now, triggers are very interesting because they siphon off of a fictional circulation system called Trion. Trion is like blood and lymph, but it's invisible and it's this energy source that powers these technologies called triggers. And so essentially, triggers, what they do is they're a handheld item that you hold. So we can see this agent here, right? Kirie Konami, she holds this USB like device, and when she activates it, it creates this combat body. And this combat body is very interesting because when the combat body is critically injured, the person within the combat body does not die. Instead, they bail out, right? They shoot up in a kind of a bolt of light back to headquarters, right? So this is a very, very kind of safe way for these soldiers to be deployed. And also, these trigger sets have radars, right? By definition. Now, I just want to note that there are a bunch of different type of triggers. Not only do the border soldiers in Medan have triggers, but also the neighbors have triggers. But we want to talk about at least the agents in Border right now. So the people from Medan, right, that are working with Border and their triggers. So note that for Medan's triggers, combat agents can have various ranks, right? And based on ranks, their triggers might look different. C rank agents, right? That's the bottom of the hierarchy. There's C rank, then B rank, then A rank, and then some special ranks above that. But C rank agents have essentially trigger sets that only contain one weapon slot. But a lot of the characters that we love the most and have exposure to through the series are B rank agents or A rank agents, right? And so that's why there's more appeal with their trigger sets, right? And creating OCs that represent kind of B rank and A rank agents. Now, B rank and A rank agents have trigger sets that contain not one weapon slot, but essentially 8 slots. So we'll focus on these. And so as we're talking about B rank and A rank agents and their trigger sets, I want to start with this diagram. Now, this diagram is provided to us by Emperor Bob, who has made substantial contributions in the server to kind of visualize and provide a visualizing tool to people that are interested in creating World Trigger OCs. And so the whole idea behind it is that normal combat triggers are represented in this form. You have your agent's parameters. Essentially, these are how good are they in, attacking or defending? How fast are they? How well do they understand a combat situation? How high is their Trion, right? Because Trion within different people, there are different levels of Treon. But also, what's interesting too is, as you can see my cursor scrolling on, there's also, as I said, 8 different slots in which you can insert weapons into, and this helps for combat utility. And this is again the basic building block of normal trigger sets for A rank and B rank agents. Now, the sum of these 8 slots, I coined a term called trigger loadouts, right? That's what we will be referring to this whole diagram that Emperor Bob made for us, which he was inspired from the BBF, which is Border Briefing Files. That is, it's kind of this fictional encyclopedia that Daisuke Ashihara actually made that displayed, information about the agents and characters in his universe, right? So all normal trigger sets, as you might notice, have a main trigger side and a sub trigger side. Thus, it's not just 8 random slots, but it is a 2x4 setup where one side is the main trigger and one side is for sub. Now, again, note that only one trigger slot in either side may be used at once. That's because the main trigger corresponds to one's dominant hand and the sub trigger corresponds to one's non-dominant hand. So when you're in combat, you can only use one of two, one hand, right? But for one hand, you can only use one thing, and you have 2 hands, right? So again, only one trigger slot in either side may be used at once. Okay, now all normal trigger sets, this is compulsory. All normal trigger sets have 2 shields and a bagworm. The shield is set up in a way that there's 1 shield in main and there's 1 shield in sub. Also, there's 1 bagworm. Well, before that, shields are kind of these green hexagons, right, that are used as defensive tools to block incoming attacks, right? But there's also 1 bagworm, and bagworm is usually in sub, but sometimes it's in main, but highly the case that it's in the sub side of the trigger, right? So bagworm is this cloak that hides agents from radar. All agents have it. Now, the remaining 5 spots can include any other trigger. So the question then is, how do you fill these slots? What can you put into these? Well, essentially, you could put an okay, first of all, there cannot be duplicate triggers on the same side. Remember that rule. But what can you put into there? Well, you can put a weapon for an attacker, right? Attacker are kind of the melee archetype, right? And there's 3 options. There's Kogetsu, Scorpion, and Ray Gust. And these are kind of swords with different properties. Now, there are weapons for snipers, right? There are 3 types of sniper rifles that you could use if you're a sniper. Maybe you're a shooter, right? That is, you generate Treon cubes that fire at long distances, and each of them have different properties. Asteroid is powerful and fires in straight lines. Hound is a homing kind of version of that. Viper is a kind of a shooter cube that you can control its firing trajectory. Meteor explodes on contact, right? You could have those weapons for shooters, or you could have those in the form of a gun, right? So, or you could also put optional triggers, right? Triggers that aren't weapons that help you in a certain way, or triggers that modify your pre-existing weapons, right? So these are a lot of options. So let's kind of break this down. What can you actually put in your trigger loadout? Well, there's so many options, but we can start with different archetypes. So the first archetype that I want to talk about is the vanilla Kogetsu attacker, right? Vanilla meaning typical, and Kogetsu attacker meaning you're attacking with Kogetsu. This is the typical trigger loadout of someone that is using Kogetsu. Again, that kind of lightsaber-like katana sword, that's called Kogetsu. Now, almost all Kogetsu users, except for 2 in the series, also equip Senku. And Senku is essentially, it's Japanese for whirlwind, and it allows the Kogetsu blade to extend for this really epic kind of remote slash. And so that's why because of its utility and also its absurd power, as we've seen in the series. Most individuals that equip Kogetsu also equip Senku too, on the side that Kogetsu is equipped, right? It is an optional trigger that is equipped on the same side as Kogetsu. Now, this here is a typical trigger loadout of a Scorpion user. Scorpion doesn't, as of this time, have any associated optional triggers, but all users of Scorpion that just use Scorpion and no other weapon type equip Scorpion both in main and in sub, right? So just be aware about that. There's also Ray Gust. Now, Ray Gust has an optional trigger called Thruster. Every single Ray Gust user equips Thruster, and Thruster is kind of this optional trigger that allows the user to have a quick burst of strength, a quick burst of speed that originates from the Ray Gust hilt, and so it's kind of this propelling motion, and so it increases offensive capability, but also increases mobility. So that's why it's very useful for a Ray Gust user to have, right? Now, let's talk about shooter archetypes. Now, this is interesting because shooter loadouts are a little bit more diverse in their possible combinations compared to the attacker archetypes, right? The reason why is because shooters actually have to consider what are called composites. That is, if a shooter is skilled enough, they are able to combine the shooter cube on their main side and the shooter cube on their sub side, merge it together, and create a more powerful attack. For example, Hound and Hound produces Hornet, which has absurd tracking capabilities more than just your regular your regular Hound. There's also Hound and Meteor, which creates Salamander, which is kind of this tracking shot that explodes on contact and is very, very powerful, right? So because of all of these options that are opened up with composite bullets, right? I've not talked about all the different composite bullets out there. There are a lot of different kinds. Because of that, there's many different ways you could build a trigger around a agent that is a shooter. But here's a vanilla shooter archetype, right? This is modeled off of Kurauchi's set. He's the shooter in OG Squad, which is B Rank's kind of, what is it, fifth ranked team, I believe. They're ranked number 5 in the B rank category. He essentially has Hound, and he's capitalizing off of Hound. He has Asteroid, and also I do want to mention every single shooter has Asteroid, at least either one Asteroid in main or sub, but the idea is Asteroid is the most powerful and standard shooter cube trigger, so you want to equip it, right? And he also has access to Meteor, right? So this enables a lot of different composite bullets associated with Hound. Now this is Nasu's set. She uses Viper predominantly. She's able to combine Viper with Asteroid for Cobra and Viper with Meteor for Tomahawk. So there's, again, all of these different archetypes and possibilities to create a set with different combinations if you're a shooter. Now here's the gunner archetype. Gunner archetype is a little bit more simple. You have one gun, and that one gun can hold 2 bullet types maximum, right? So if you see something like this where there's someone with a assault rifle and they equip 3 different types, of bullets, that is completely wrong. You cannot make an OC like that because a gun cannot shoot more than 2 bullets, right? And remember, all of these kind of slots, they all correspond to one single assault rifle. So it's not that, oh, in order to go from Asteroid to Hound, you have to put away your Asteroid gun and then, like, summon your Hound gun. That's not how it works. It's just like a switch in your firearm, right? Now, here's a typical assault rifle loadout for someone that can use Asteroid and Hound. Here's someone that's holding a handgun trigger, and they can use Asteroid and Viper bullets. Note that there's also shotguns, there's Gatling guns, there's grenade guns, but essentially the standard ones are assault rifles and handguns. Now here's an example of an all-rounder. This is what happens when you combine an attacker loadout with either a gunner or shooter loadout. You get something called an all-rounder. But note that you can have an all-rounder loadout, but you might not have the title of an all-rounder. That's because you're not recognized as an all-rounder unless you have 6,000 attacker points and 6,000 either gunner or shooter points. These are like kind of points as calculated within the series. So just remember that. So these are just some different examples of all-rounder sets. Now there's snipers, and snipers have a very different combat style, so they rely on being off radar. So unlike most other combat agents that you see, Bagworm is in the 4th slot on the sub trigger side. For some reason, by construction, most of the sniper agents in the series have their bagworms not in the 4th slot, but in the 1st slot on their sub side. And sniper triggers, your options are Egret, Ibis, or Lightning. Typically, snipers equip 2 or 3 of these. Essentially, Egret, Ibis, and Lightning are all sniper rifles with different properties that scale off of Treon. The higher your Treon is, if you're holding Egret, the longer your range is. For Ibis, the higher your Treon is, the more damage your bullets do. And finally, for Lightning, the higher your Treon is, the faster your bullets are, right? So they all have kind of different utilities, and typically you want to bring in 2 or 3 of these as a sniper agent. Now, finally, I present to you a perfect all-rounder. The idea of perfect all-rounders, it's an agent with 6,000 points in attacker, gunner or shooter, and sniper triggers, so all 3 categories. These are known as perfect all-rounders. And so perfect all-rounders are actually really interesting. There's only one in the series, that's Reiji Kizaki from Tamakoma 1. So the idea is that you can use all 3 types of triggers proficiently. And so in this example, we have someone that can shoot with Egret as a sniper, but can also attack in melee scenarios with Kogetsu and Senku, as well as having some kind of ranged option in the mid-range. These are gunner triggers, right? So Asteroid and Hound handgun, right? And this still respects the idea that you have 2 shields and a bagworm, but this is a perfect all-rounder. Finally, we have trappers. We also have spotters, but we know nothing about spotters, so we're not going to talk about them. Trappers are truly an anomaly. They use Switchbox. We have very little idea what Switchbox does other than we know it deploys traps on the battlefield. The only 2 traps that we've seen in the series is a trap that teleports different allies from place to place. So it's like a teleportation warp that you can step on. It's a warp trigger, that's what it's called, as well as a blade trigger, which was seen used by Captain Fukushima of A rank, I think AO2. And he essentially was able to spawn a kind of a blade out of the ground to help defend the border headquarters during one of the series' biggest fights against Aftocrater. So that's trappers. We know nothing about them, but we know that in order to wield Switchbox, you need very high Treon. We're thinking like Treon that's at least 8 or higher is considered high Treon. Well, high Treon is considered 7 or higher usually in the series, but you need to have an extraordinary amount of Treon in order to be using Switchbox. And this is the set that all Switchbox users in the series, including Fukushima and the one on Kako Squat, the cat. Oh gosh, what's it? Oh, what's her name? I forgot. But there are 3 trappers in the series, and essentially that's their trigger sets. Okay, let's see an example, a case study of how do you build a World Trigger OC. So in order to do that, I'm going to give you an example from the OC that I created, and this OC's name is Watsumaru Kitani. Now, Kitani is an OC that I created with a backstory that he was recruited to Kaku Squad before the start of the canon World Trigger series events, but he had an epileptic episode, unfortunately, while he was in his Treon body, and that kind of caused Borders leadership to decide to decommission him. So that's kind of my explanation for how, oh, this is still able to keep in line with Ashihara's World Trigger canon, but it's my creative insert into that universe while still respecting the events of that series. Now let's take a look at this agent's trigger loadout that I created. So this is the page, and again, as I said earlier, the website to build this trigger set is provided by Emperor Bob. It's emperorbob7.github.io/ocmaker, and so it's this original character maker that draws inspiration from the border briefing files in the way that the agent's trigger loadouts are displayed in that book, right? And so something you should notice immediately is, well, before I do that, I've credited the artist No Eyebrow from DeviantArt for these images that I'm using for my OC. The chibi that I made below, that my cursor is hovering over, is something that I drew. Now, I've added very short descriptions of my OC's backstory too, so you can understand a little bit more. So this is like extra customization that I did in MS Paint on top of what Emperor Bob's OC Maker has. But now let's get into the trigger set analysis. The first thing you should notice is that there is 2 shields, so it respects this idea of all normal trigger sets have 2 shields, one in main and one in sub. There's also 1 bagworm, and it is on the sub side. And because Kitani is not a sniper, it is on the 4th trigger slot instead of the 1st trigger slot of the sub trigger. Now, Kitani has the loadout of an all-rounder, but in my headcanon, he is a gunner by classification because he started as a gunner but does not have 6,000 points in Scorpion yet. Now, as an A-rank agent, Kitani has the ability to wield customized versions of pre-existing triggers. The whole idea about this is all throughout the series, A-rank agents have access to customized triggers. For example, say Kitora from AO5, so that is the PR team led by Arashiyama. She has a customized Scorpion that has this rotating blade function. The same can be said for AO6, which is Miwa Squad. Miwa Squad has 2 agents with customized triggers. Captain Miwa himself has a customized lead bullet with functions that are tied to the same side of the main trigger side where he has his handgun. And what is Yonea? Agent Yonea from the same squad has a customized Kogetsu, which is a spear instead of a katana, right? So it's stuff like that. A-rank agents have access to customized versions of pre-existing triggers. Now for Kitani, I've created for him customized meteors that deploy non-damaging wind boxes. So it's basically, imagine he could like create explosions that can push people away or propel himself. Like he could create one and then it could cause him to fly forward or backwards in a certain direction. So it's kind of this mobility tool as well as this control tool. Now, Kitani fills the last available slot with Grasshopper, right? So that's, again, we've gone over, he has handgun, Scorpion, these custom meteors, shields, bagworms. Finally, for this last slot, I put in Grasshopper to kind of enhance his mobility. Now, I do want to go on a tangent about free trigger slots because I've been kind of talking to a lot of people in the World Trigger Discord, but something that's made a big impression on me is my talks with Gasting in the server. That's Ghasting. Now, Gasting has this really interesting idea where he believes that free trigger slots are actually the best slot. And his rationale for it, which I'm beginning to agree more and more, is that if I did not have Grasshopper here, but instead I had a free trigger, well, then this agent uses less Treon in order to build this set. So there's more reserve Treon. What can that reserve Treon be used for? It could be used for more bullets for my handgun. It can be used for more kind of instances that I could deploy of this custom meteor. It could be used to make my shields stronger, as well as it can allow me to not bleed out so quickly from sustaining a injury um, in the Treon body, right? Because when you take a critical injury, you drain Treon. So the more Treon you have, the less susceptible you are to stuff like that. So don't think about this as, oh, I need to fill out all 8 slots, but instead think about it as, oh, what slots do I want to fill out? And after that, then I'll think about, oh, where are spaces, that I can have free slots, or do I want to, instead of having a free slot, do I want to insert another trigger? So it is okay to have a free trigger slot. That is completely acceptable. Finally, Kitani has a side effect, and this is kind of a ability that's accessible to some people with high Treon. In his case, he can sense where people's Treons are in a large area, and essentially all agents in the series that have side effects have at least 7 Treon. So now this gets us into a talk about our parameter space and how we define our parameter space, right? So Grasshopper and the custom meteors, right, increase Kitani's mobility. As a matter of fact, we see that all agents with Grasshopper in the series have a mobility of at least 8. So therefore, I say here that Grasshopper and the custom meteors necessitate that Kitani has a mobility of at least 8. Now, the range statistic takes the maximum distance of offensive capable triggers. So in this case, the 2 offensive capable triggers that Kitani has are his handgun and his scorpion. Now, scorpion, if it's not tied to mantis, which you need scorpion on 2 sides in order to do that, as well as the skill to pull off mantis, non-mantis scorpion has a range of 1, right? It doesn't go very far. Whereas handguns has a range of 3, right? That is the reason why I say that is because every single agent in the border briefing files, if they have handgun, and no other ranged trigger that have greater range, their range is capped to 3. The exception for this is Uiga, but that's likely because he has been using his handguns in a different way than most handgun users, right? So for now, we say that on average, handguns have a range of 3, right? The point is, parameter space is affected by your trigger loadout choices. So when you're filling out this OC maker that Emperor Bob has so graciously given us, and you're creating your OC, you have to be really mindful of what numbers you put in your parameter space based on what your trigger loadout is. So that's the biggest challenge of OC making, right? It's creating this good trigger loadout that really respects the series precedent on triggers, but otherwise you can get really creative. You can see for me, I took it a step further by taking the border briefing files pages. Like this is the official border briefing file encyclopedia that Ashihara has kind of created to give information about his series. And I've kind of made edits to these that take Kitani's existence into Kako Squad into account, right? Kind of explaining that there's, an extra bed, that, the parameters for the squad or the description of the squad is different, right? Stuff like that. You can get very, very creative as long as you respect what the trigger loadout is and the parameter space based on the trigger loadout. Then you will have a very, good working original character. The case study's over. Go make your own OC. But first, before that, I want to talk about critical mistakes that you can make when building an OC's trigger loadout. The reason why I've changed the background to white is because I'm very serious about these types of things. You do not want to make errors like this. If you do, I'll forgive you and I'll tell you where you've made the error, but it would just be, kind of idiotic to make an error like this once you've heard me say it once. Common mistakes in OC triggers include pairing incompatible options. What I mean is that thruster is an optional trigger for ray gust. You need to have ray gust on the same side in order to use it. You can't just put it in there without ray gust. This is completely illegal. Another illegal thing is placing dedicated optional triggers on the wrong side. Senku cannot be put in your sub trigger. It has to be put in the same side as Kogetsu, which is in main. So Senku here has to be on the main side. Another thing that's illegal, as I said again, is having a gun with more than two bullet types. This is explicitly said in the series. Guns must only have at most two bullet types. It could have one bullet type, it could have two bullet types, but you cannot have three bullet types. Now, here's something that's not ideal. Do you see that this agent has Switchbox and Grasshopper, and like they're trying to do all of these different things? And what's so egregious is by doing all of these things, this agent has left out the two shields and the bagworm. You cannot do that. You have to respect the rule that if you are a normal trigger, a combat agent with a normal trigger, you have two shields and one bagworm. Your two shields are one in main, one in sub, and then one bagworm, typically in sub. Do not do this. I see this happen all the time. It's idiotic. Do not do it. Finally, another thing that's bad is stacking weapon types on one side. Do you see that this gunner, OC, has a handgun, but then he also has an assault rifle, and then he has a shotgun? This is very impractical. Imagine if you want to shoot with a handgun, you shoot with it, then you have to despawn the handgun and then summon an assault rifle. The reason why that's bad is because, when you have a gun and you summon it and then you desummon it and then you summon it back, that's just illogical. Might as well just put it in the sub trigger so that you can have one in one side. This is a huge waste of Treon, and there is no agent that is a gunner that does this in the entire series, except for Reiji. But Reiji is a different story because he has a very, very special, a very unique trigger loadout that disrespects a lot of these rules that I've laid out. So don't do this. That is the end of it, and thank you very, very much for attending this seminar. Bye. Good luck with creating your OCs.